Imagine this, a bustling city restaurant, the clatter of cutlery, the murmur of 100 conversations. Eliza, a waitress with dreams bigger than her tiny apartment, is just trying to make it through her shift. But when a dismissive, booming voice from table 7 shatters the evening's peace, she faces a choice: ignore it and keep her head down, or risk everything by confronting the powerful man whose arrogance fills the room. Little does she know her simple request: "Sir, could you please lower your voice?" is about to set off a chain reaction that will bring the formidable owner of the Crimson Sparrow to her doorstep the very next morning, changing her life forever. The Crimson Sparrow wasn't just any restaurant. It was an institution in the heart of downtown, a place where deals were brokered over perfectly seared scallops and anniversaries celebrated with champagne that cost more than Eliza Miller's weekly rent. Eliza, with her neatly pinned auburn hair and an observant gaze that missed nothing, moved through its opulent, dimly lit space with a practiced grace. She was a ghost in the machine of fine dining, efficient, unobtrusive, her smile ever ready, even when her feet throbbed and her mind was miles away, sketching out recipes she longed to create. Tonight, a Tuesday, was deceptively busy. A large corporate party occupied the coveted terrace, their laughter echoing while the main dining room hummed with the low thrum of well-heeled patrons. Eliza was juggling 3 tables, one of which included a young couple on what was clearly a nervous first date, and another, an elderly woman dining alone, savoring her coq au vin with deliberate slowness. Then there was table 7. He'd arrived alone, a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a Savile Row suit that whispered of old money and unspoken power. His silver hair was swept back, his features sharp, and his eyes the color of a stormy sea, scanned the room with an air of bored authority. He'd ordered a steak rare and a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1982 without so much as glancing at the prices. Eliza had recognized the label. It was one of the most expensive wines they stocked. The trouble began when his phone rang. It wasn't a discreet vibration, but a loud classical ringtone that sliced through the ambient noise. He answered it with a booming, "Cromwell speaking, Alistair Cromwell." The name resonated with a distant clang in Eliza's memory. A titan of industry, infamous for hostile takeovers and a ruthless business acumen. His voice, amplified by the restaurant's acoustics and his own apparent disregard for his surroundings, was a battering ram against the otherwise sophisticated atmosphere. "Look, Peterson, I don't care about your projections. Make it happen," he barked into the phone. "Liquidate the assets if you have to. I want results, not excuses." Heads turned. The young couple at table 5 flinched. The elderly woman at table 6 paused her fork halfway to her lips, a frown etching her delicate features. Even the usually unflappable maitre d' Julien cast a nervous glance from his station near the entrance. Eliza felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She'd seen this before. Powerful men who believed the world was their private office. Usually Julien would handle it, a subtle word, a polite deflection. But Julien was currently engrossed with a problem at the till. Cromwell continued, his voice laced with impatience. "I'm at the Crimson Sparrow, for God's sake, trying to have a civilized meal, and you're bothering me with this incompetence." The irony was lost on him. Eliza delivered a bread basket to the nervous couple, offering a small, apologetic smile. The young man looked grateful. The tension was palpable. She knew the restaurant's reputation was built on impeccable service and an ambiance of refined tranquility. Cromwell was shattering it piece by piece. She caught Maria's eye, her fellow waitress, who gave a slight shake of her head, a silent warning. Don't get involved. Maria was pragmatic, focused on tips and avoiding trouble. But Eliza's grandmother, a woman who believed in quiet dignity and treating everyone with respect, had instilled in her a stubborn streak of fairness. Cromwell slammed his hand on the table. "Are you deaf, Peterson? I said it's non-negotiable." That was it. The elderly woman at table 6 visibly winced, her quiet enjoyment ruined. Eliza's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about noise. It was about disrespect. It was about one man's ego trampling over everyone else's evening. Taking a deep breath, ignoring the frantic, almost imperceptible hand signals from Maria, Eliza changed course. She walked steadily towards table 7. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drummer heralding a potential disaster. She could feel the eyes of the entire dining room on her back. She reached his table just as he was saying, "And another thing that idiot Henderson needs to understand." "Excuse me, sir," Eliza said, her voice low but clear, cutting through his tirade. Alistair Cromwell lowered his phone slightly, his steely eyes fixing on her with a look of utter astonishment, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. "What is it?" he snapped, not bothering to cover the receiver. "Sir," Eliza repeated, maintaining eye contact, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "I understand. You're on an important call, but your voice is carrying quite significantly. Several of our other guests are being disturbed. I would be very grateful if you could perhaps lower your volume or perhaps take the call in the lobby." The silence that followed was deafening. Cromwell's face, already stern, hardened into a mask of cold fury. He slowly placed his phone face down on the pristine white tablecloth. The man on the other end, Peterson, was left hanging. "Are you telling me?" Cromwell said, his voice dangerously soft, now far more menacing than his previous booming, "how to conduct myself?" Eliza stood her ground. "I am merely requesting, sir, that you show consideration for our other patrons. This is a shared space." His lip curled into a sneer. "A shared space, young lady. I could buy this shared space with the loose change in my pocket. Who do you think you are? I'm a waitress here, sir, and it's my job to ensure all our guests have a pleasant dining experience." "Pleasant." He gave a short, derisive laugh. "My experience is rapidly deteriorating thanks to your impertinence." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I believe you're Mr. Alistair Cromwell, sir," Eliza said, her voice still even. "But here at the Crimson Sparrow, you're a guest just like everyone else." A muscle twitches in Cromwell's jaw. "You have a lot of nerve, young lady, a lot of nerves. We'll see how your manager appreciates your dedication to customer service." He picked up his wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "Get me my bill, and then get out of my sight." Eliza nodded curtly. "Certainly, sir." She turned and walked towards the point-of-sale system, her legs feeling like lead. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. She could feel Cromwell's glare burning into her back. She printed his bill, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped the slip. When she returned to his table, he was on his phone again, his voice once more a low, venomous growl. "Unbelievable arrogance. Some little waitress." "Yes, the Crimson Sparrow. I expect you to deal with it, Henderson. Promptly." Henderson. That was the owner's surname, Mr. Vauban, Robert Henderson. A man Eliza had only seen a handful of times, always looking distinguished and slightly aloof. Cromwell knew him, and he was clearly demanding her head on a platter. Cromwell snatched the bill from her, scribbled a signature on the credit card slip. With such force, he almost tore it, and stood abruptly. He didn't leave a tip. Of course he didn't. As he strode towards the exit, he paused by Julian the maitre d', who had finally extricated himself and now looked pale and anxious. Cromwell muttered something to him sharp and brief. Julian nodded, his face grim. The moment the heavy oak door closed behind Alistair Cromwell, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the restaurant. The nervous couple visibly relaxed. The elderly lady gave Eliza a small, grateful smile and a subtle nod. Maria rushed over. "Eliza, are you crazy?" That was Alistair Cromwell. He could crush this place, never mind you. "He was disturbing everyone, Maria," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Someone had to say something." "But it didn't have to be you," Maria lamented. "Julian should have handled it." Julian approached, his usual smooth demeanor ruffled. "Eliza, Mr. Cromwell is a very influential man and a personal acquaintance of Mr. Henderson." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "He was furious. He specifically mentioned you." Eliza's heart sank. "So I'm fired?" Julian looked uncomfortable. "I don't have the authority to do that. But Mr. Henderson will be here tomorrow morning. He wants to see you, 9 a.m. sharp. He was very specific." The dread that had been a knot in Eliza's stomach uncoiled, spreading icy tendrils through her veins. The owner himself, coming in specially, to see her. There was no way this ended well. She had stood up for what was right, but it seemed in the world of the Crimson Sparrow that doing the right thing could cost you everything. As she mechanically cleared Cromwell's table, the nearly full glass of exquisite wine, the barely touched steak, she couldn't shake the image of Mr. Henderson's stern face or the echo of Cromwell's parting words, "I expect you to deal with it." The hours between the end of her shift and the looming 9 a.m. meeting stretched into an eternity. Eliza barely slept. She replayed the confrontation with Alistair Cromwell endlessly in her mind, each iteration bringing a fresh wave of anxiety. Had she been too bold, too naive? Should she have just let it go, as Maria suggested? But then she'd see the elderly woman's wince the young couple's discomfort, and a small, defiant part of her would insist she'd done the right thing. Principles, however, didn't pay the rent for the small, slightly damp apartment she shared with her ailing mother. Her mother, Clara, was her rock and her primary motivation. Clara had worked 2 jobs for years to raise Eliza after her father left her hands, now gnarled with arthritis, her lungs weakened by a persistent cough that doctors couldn't quite diagnose, but which seemed to worsen with stress. Eliza's dream of attending Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, of becoming a chef and opening her own small bistro, wasn't just for herself. It was to give her mother a life of comfort and ease. Losing this job, especially under a cloud, would be a devastating blow to those aspirations. At 7 a.m., she was up forcing down a piece of toast she couldn't taste. She chose her most professional yet unassuming outfit, a plain black skirt, a crisp white blouse, and low heels. She wanted to look responsible, not like a troublemaker. The walk to the Crimson Sparrow was usually a chance for Eliza to mentally prepare for her shift to observe the city waking up. Today, every street corner seemed to hold a premonition, every passing face a judgment. The grand facade of the restaurant, usually a symbol of her hard-earned employment, now looked like a courthouse where her sentence was about to be read. She arrived at 8:45 a.m., her palms sweating. The restaurant was quiet, bathed in the cool morning light, filtering through the large windows, a stark contrast to its vibrant nighttime persona. cleaning crew were finishing up the scent of polish and lemon cleaner in the air. Julian was already there, looking even more stressed than the night before. He offered her a sympathetic but grim smile. "Eliza, Mr. Henderson is in his office. He asked for you to go straight in." "Is he very angry?" Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. Julian winced. "Let's just say Mr. Cromwell was very persuasive in his feedback, and Mr. Henderson values his patronage and their connection immensely." He gestured down the corridor leading to the back offices. "Good luck, Eliza." "Good luck." She felt like she needed a miracle. Taking a deep breath, she walked down the hushed corridor. The door to Mr. Henderson's office was slightly ajar. She could hear voices, Mr. Henderson's familiar, somewhat reedy tone, and another, deeper, richer voice she didn't recognize with a faint, almost indiscernible Italian accent. Her hand hovered over the door, poised to knock. This was it. The end of her job. The black mark on her resume. The disappointment she would have to bring home to her mother. She braced herself. She knocked lightly. "Come in," Mr. Henderson called out. Eliza pushed the door open and stepped inside. Mr. Robert Henderson, a man in his late 60s with thinning grey hair, spectacles perched on his nose, and an impeccably tailored suit that always seemed a size too big for his slight frame, was seated behind his large mahogany desk. He looked up, his expression unreadable, but undeniably serious. But it wasn't just Mr. Henderson in the room. Standing by the window looking out onto the small, meticulously kept herb garden that supplied the kitchen was another man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of dark, silver-streaked hair swept back from a high forehead. He wore a simple, dark cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, exuding an aura of quiet power and innate elegance that made Mr. Henderson, despite his expensive suit, look almost provincial. As he turned, Eliza's breath caught in her throat. His face was older, lined with experience, and a certain weariness around the eyes. But the bone structure, the piercing gaze, the almost regal bearing, it was hauntingly familiar. He looked like a more rugged, less polished, but somehow more authentic version of Alistair Cromwell. The stranger's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, met hers. They held a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity assessment. There was no immediate anger, no judgment, just a calm, steady regard. "Ah, Miss Miller," Mr. Henderson said, his voice a little strained. "Thank you for coming in. Please close the door. Have a seat." He gestured to one of the plush leather chairs in front of his desk. Eliza did as she was told, her mind reeling. Who was this other man? And why was he here for her meeting? Was he Cromwell's lawyer? A higher-up from Cromwell's corporation, sent to ensure she was dealt with severely. Miss Miller. Mr. Henderson began shuffling some papers on his desk nervously. "We have, as you are undoubtedly aware, a rather delicate situation stemming from last night's incident with Mr. Alistair Cromwell." Eliza nodded, her throat dry. "Yes, sir. Mr. Cromwell is a valued acquaintance." Henderson continued, choosing his words carefully. "His opinion matters a great deal, and he was, to put it mildly, extremely displeased." The man by the window turned, fully leaning back slightly against the sill, his arms crossed. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the room, making it feel smaller, more intense. "He believes," Henderson went on, avoiding Eliza's gaze, now focusing on a spot on his desk, "that you were insubordinate, unprofessional, and that your actions were detrimental to the reputation of the Crimson Sparrow." Eliza's heart sank further. This was the official indictment. "He has made certain," Demands, Henderson said, his voice dropping. Demands that, given my relationship with him and his potential influence, I am finding it very difficult to ignore. Eliza braced herself for the inevitable "you're fired." But then the man by the window spoke. His voice was deep resonant, with that subtle melodic cadence Eliza had noticed earlier. "Robert," he said, addressing Mr. Henderson with an air of familiar authority that surprised Eliza. "Perhaps before you pronounce judgment, we should hear Miss Miller's side of the story directly, without the dramatic embellishments of Alistair's temper." Mr. Henderson looked up at the stranger, a flicker of something, some deference, relief in his eyes. "Of course, Antonio, you're right." He turned to Eliza. "Miss Miller, this is Signor Antonio Bellini." Antonio Bellini. The name didn't mean anything to her. Yet. Signor Bellini pushed himself off the windowsill and took a couple of slow steps towards her. He stopped a few feet away, his expression serious but not unkind. "Miss Miller," he said, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I understand you asked Mr. Cromwell to lower his voice last night because he was disturbing other guests. Is that correct?" Eliza, surprised by his calm and direct approach, found her voice. "Yes, Signor Bellini. He was on a phone call, speaking very loudly. Other patrons were clearly uncomfortable. I felt it was my responsibility to ensure a pleasant atmosphere for everyone." "And what was Mr. Cromwell's reaction to your request?" Bellini asked. "He was angered," Eliza admitted. "He said I was impertinent. He asked if I knew who he was. He then demanded his bill and told Mr. Henderson he expected him to deal with me." Bellini nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Alistair can be theatrical when he feels his importance is being challenged." He glanced at Henderson, then back at Eliza. "Tell me, Miss Miller, were you rude to him, disrespectful in your tone or manner?" "No, sir," Eliza said firmly. "I was polite but firm. I addressed him as sir. I explained my reasons calmly. I even suggested he could take his call in the lobby." Bellini's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, so fleeting Eliza almost missed it. "And did you know who Alistair Cromwell was before you approached him?" "I recognized the name, sir, after he announced it on his call. I knew he was a prominent businessman. But you still chose to confront him." "It wasn't a confrontation, sir," Eliza clarified. "It was a request. And yes, I did. Because it wasn't about who he was. It was about his behavior and its effect on others." A silence settled in the room. Mr. Henderson fidgeted with a pen. Signor Bellini continued to study Eliza, his expression unreadable. Eliza felt as though her entire future was balanced on a knife's edge, dependent on this stranger's assessment. Finally, Bellini spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Robert," he said, turning to Mr. Henderson, "it seems to me Miss Miller acted with considerable courage and professionalism, upholding the standards we expect at the Crimson Sparrow. Standards that are perhaps sometimes forgotten by certain patrons." Mr. Henderson looked surprised, then flustered. "Well, yes, Antonio, but Alistair was adamant." "Alistair," Bellini interrupted gently but firmly, "is an old friend, and like many old friends, he can sometimes be a damn fool, especially when his ego is bruised." He turned back to Eliza. "Miss Henderson, you see, is my managing partner here at the Crimson Sparrow, but I, Miss Miller, am the owner." Eliza started dumbfounded. The owner. This unassuming, quietly spoken man was the true power behind the Crimson Sparrow. not the slightly fussy Mr. Henderson she'd always assumed was the sole proprietor. This changed everything. Or did it? Cromwell was still Bellini's old friend. "Mr. Cromwell called me last night as well, Miss Miller." Signor Bellini continued, his eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. He was, as you can imagine, quite incandescent with rage. He demanded your immediate dismissal. He threatened to withdraw his considerable, though informal, financial goodwill towards this establishment. Eliza's stomach plummeted. So this was it. Even if he admired her courage, business was business. However, Bellini went on a subtle shift in his tone. He also, in his tirade, inadvertently described your actions in such a way that I found myself rather impressed. Impressed, Eliza could only blink. He mentioned you were calm, you didn't raise your voice, and you specifically cited the comfort of other guests. He also mentioned with some indignation that you suggested he was just like everyone else here. Bellini chuckled a warm, genuine sound. That, Miss Miller, is a sentiment I wholeheartedly endorse. In my restaurant, every guest deserves respect, and every staff member is expected to ensure that. He paused, his expression turning serious again. The Crimson Sparrow has faced challenges recently. Financial pressures, increased competition. My friend Alistair, for all his bluster, has been a discreet supporter, a silent patron whose quiet backing has helped us navigate some rough waters. His threat to withdraw that support is not insignificant. Robert will attest to that. Mr. Henderson nodded gravely. Indeed, it would be problematic. So, Miss Miller, Bellini said, his eyes locking onto hers, we have a dilemma. Do we appease a wealthy and influential friend, a man whose patronage, however boorish his behavior last night, is financially important? Or do we stand by an employee who acted according to the highest principles of hospitality and service, even at personal risk? Eliza held her breath. The question hung in the air, heavy with consequence. The silence in Signor Bellini's office was thick enough to spread on toast. Eliza felt like a character in a play, waiting for the protagonist to deliver the pivotal line that would determine the entire third act. Mr. Henderson looked from Bellini to Eliza and back again, his brow furrowed with anxiety, clearly caught between loyalty to his demanding friend and the undeniable logic of his business partner. Signor Bellini finally broke the silence, a wry smile playing on his lips. Frankly, Miss Miller Alistair's tantrums are legendary, and usually after he's had a night to cool off and a strong espresso, he comes to his senses. Sometimes. He walked back towards the window, his gaze drifting to the herb garden again for a moment, before returning to Eliza. What Alistair conveniently failed to mention in his irate call to me last night. Bellini continued his tone, taking on a new layer of intrigue. And what he also likely failed to mention to you, Robert, when he called you, was the reason for his visit to the Crimson Sparrow yesterday evening. Mr. Henderson looked puzzled. Reason I assumed he was simply dining, as he occasionally does. He never books, just appears. Oh, he was dining, Bellini affirmed. But it wasn't a casual visit. You see, Robert, I asked him to come. Henderson blinked. You asked Alistair Cromwell to come here. Why wouldn't you tell me? Bellini sighed, a hint of weariness in his expression. Because, my friend, I needed an unvarnished opinion. A brutally honest assessment. We've been discussing the need for a potential refresh, perhaps even a significant new investment to elevate the Crimson Sparrow to ensure its legacy for another generation. Alistair, for all his faults, has a keen eye for business and surprisingly a decent palate. I wanted him to experience the restaurant as any high-paying customer would anonymously, and give me his candid feedback on the food, the service, the ambiance, everything. Eliza felt a slow dawning of understanding. Cromwell wasn't just a disruptive diner. He was, in a way, an inspector, a secret shopper with immense power. So his behavior, Eliza began hesitantly, was partly his authentic overbearing self. Bellini finished a glint in his eye, and partly, I suspect, a deliberate test, pushing boundaries to see how the staff would react, or if they would react at all. He has a peculiar way of stress-testing situations and people. Mr. Henderson looked aghast. He was testing us, and he chose Miss Miller's confrontation as his primary feedback. In essence, yes, Bellini said, though I doubt he intended for it to escalate quite like that. Alistair tends to get carried away when he feels he's not the most important person in the room. His report to me was colourful, full of indignation about this uppity waitress. But between the lines of his bluster, as I said, I found something else. He turned fully to Eliza, his expression softening. He described almost verbatim what you said here at the Crimson Sparrow. You're a guest, just like everyone else. That Miss Miller resonated with me deeply. It's the ethos I built this restaurant on, though I fear it's an ethos that sometimes gets diluted. Eliza felt a blush creep up her neck. She had simply spoken her mind, her belief in fairness. So, Bellini continued, when Alistair demanded your dismissal this morning, and believe me, he called me again at the crack of dawn, still fuming, though perhaps a decibel lower. I told him I would consider it. But first I wanted to meet this impertinent waitress myself. Just then, as if summoned by the sheer force of his name being repeatedly invoked, there was a sharp, decisive knock on the office door. Before Henderson or Bellini could respond, the door opened and Alistair Cromwell himself strode in. He looked marginally less thunderous than the night before, but his face was still set in severe lines. He'd clearly expected to find Henderson alone, ready to report Eliza's termination. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he saw not only Bellini, but also Eliza seated and very much not dismissed. "Antonio!" Cromwell exclaimed, his voice a mixture of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here? I thought you were in Milan until Thursday." "Change of plans, Alistair," Bellini said smoothly, his calm a stark contrast to Cromwell's barely concealed agitation. "I decided the matter of Miss Miller required my personal attention. We were just discussing your insightful visit last night." Cromwell shot a venomous glare at Eliza, then turned back to Bellini, his jaw tight. Insightful? The service was an outrage. This girl, he gestured dismissively towards Eliza, was insolent. She needs to be taught a lesson about respecting the clientele who pay her wages. Ah, yes, the wages, Bellini mused, walking slowly towards his old friend. Wages paid by the restaurant, Alistair, which aims to provide a pleasant experience for all its patrons, not just the one with the loudest voice or the deepest pockets. Cromwell scoffed. "Don't be sentimental, Antonio. This is business. You can't afford de behold control to alienate people like me. You know the pressure Henderson is under." Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him. "Indeed, I do know the pressures," Bellini said, his voice hardening slightly. "And I also know that true lasting business is built on integrity, quality, and respect. Principles Miss Miller demonstrated admirably last night while you, my friend, were behaving like a boor." Cromwell looked taken aback, momentarily speechless. It was clear he wasn't used to being addressed so bluntly, even by Bellini. She embarrassed me in front of your other customers. Cromwell finally spluttered. No, Alistair, Bellini corrected him calmly. You embarrassed yourself. Miss Miller simply held up a mirror to your behavior, and from what I gather, the other customers were rather relieved. He gestured towards Eliza. Miss Miller, would you care to share with Mr. Toole, Cromwell, the reactions of the other diners he was so considerate of? Eliza hesitated, glancing at Cromwell's thunderous face. This was getting more surreal by the minute. But Bellini's steady, encouraging gaze gave her courage. The couple on table 5 seemed very uncomfortable, sir, she said, addressing Cromwell directly but respectfully. They flinched several times when your voice rose, and the elderly lady at table 6, who was dining alone, looked quite distressed. She actually smiled at me after you left, Mr. Cromwell. A grateful smile. Cromwell's expression soured further. He clearly hadn't considered or cared about the impact on anyone but himself. This is ridiculous, Cromwell muttered, though some of the wind had clearly been taken out of his sails. Are we really going to litigate restaurant etiquette? Perhaps not litigate, Bellini said, but certainly discuss, especially when it concerns the future of the Crimson Sparrow. He paused, letting his words sink in. Alistair, I asked you here as a friend, and as an astute businessman, to give me an honest appraisal. And in your own unique way you did. You showed me there's a spine in this establishment. You showed me that even when faced with a difficult, intimidating customer, one of my staff had the courage and the professionalism to uphold our standards. He looked at Eliza. Miss Miller, your actions were not insubordinate. They were commendable. You protected the ambiance of this restaurant and the experience of its guests. That is precisely what I expect from my team. Eliza felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. She wasn't going to be fired. Cromwell, however, looked far from placated. So that's it. She gets a pat on the back, and I'm supposed to... What? Apologize. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Don't hold your breath, Antonio. An apology would be fitting, but I won't hold my breath either, Bellini said dryly. However, Alistair, this incident has illuminated something important for me. It's not just about new decor or a revamped menu. It's about the spirit of the place. The people. He walked over to his desk, picked up a small framed photograph Eliza hadn't noticed before. It showed a younger Bellini arm in arm, with another man, both beaming, standing in front of what looked like a much humbler, smaller restaurant. You remember Bellini's trattoria, Alistair? Bellini asked, his voice softer now, tinged with nostalgia. Where we both practically grow up, my father, your Uncle Marco. They poured their hearts into that little place. It wasn't fancy, but it had soul. Everyone was treated like family. Cromwell looked at the photo, and for the first time a different emotion flickered in his eyes, something less harsh, almost wistful. Marco's gnocchi, he said quietly. Best in the city. Best in the world, Bellini corrected with a sad smile. He believed in hospitality from the heart, Alistair, not from the wallet. I built the Crimson Sparrow on that foundation, even if it looks grander on the outside. He placed the photo back on the desk, his gaze returning to Eliza. Miss Miller, in standing up to Mr. Cromwell's exuberance, he said, a slight twinkle in his eye. You reminded me of that core principle. You reminded me what the Crimson Sparrow is truly supposed to be about. He then turned to face both Cromwell and Henderson. Therefore, not only is Miss Miller not going to be dismissed, I am going to ask her to take on a new role. Eliza started, utterly bewildered. A new role? Cromwell looked incredulous. A new role? Are you mad, Antonio? You're promoting her for arguing with a customer, I'm promoting her for demonstrating leadership integrity and a commitment to excellence under pressure, Bellini stated firmly. Qualities this restaurant needs more of, especially now. He looked at Eliza. Miss Miller, I understand you have aspirations beyond waiting tables. Julian has mentioned you often talk about food, about recipes, that your dream is to be a chef. Eliza's heart leaped. Yes, sir. More than anything. I've always dreamt of going to a place like Le Cordon Bleu, but... She trailed off, thinking of the prohibitive cost. Le Cordon Bleu, Bellini repeated, nodding slowly. An excellent institution. He smiled. Well, Paris can wait for a moment. First, I want you to bring some of that passion, that integrity into my kitchen, or at least closer to it. He paused dramatically. Miss Miller, Mr. Henderson and I have been discussing the need for a new assistant manager. Someone who understands our clientele, our standards, and who isn't afraid to uphold them. Someone with a fresh perspective. The position comes with a significant pay rise, and, he added with another glance at Cromwell, considerably more authority to deal with challenging situations. Eliza was speechless. From facing dismissal to being offered assistant manager in the space of an hour, it was beyond anything she could have imagined. Cromwell looked like he'd swallowed a wasp. You can't be serious, Antonio. I've never been more serious, Alistair. Bellini replied, his gaze unwavering. The Crimson Sparrow needs a renewal of spirit, not just a coat of paint. Perhaps Miss Miller is the first step in that direction. He turned back to Eliza, his expression kind. What do you say, Miss Miller? Are you up for the challenge? Eliza felt as though the world had tilted on its axis and then miraculously righted itself in a far better position assistant manager. Her. The girl who just hours ago was mentally composing her resignation speech to preempt the inevitable firing. Signor Bellini, she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Yes, of course I accept. Thank you. Thank you so much. A wave of gratitude so potent it brought tears to her eyes, washed over her. This wasn't just a job. It was an affirmation. Alistair Cromwell looked apoplectic. This is preposterous. You're rewarding insubordination, Antonio. You're undermining Henderson's authority. Mr. Henderson, who had been observing this astonishing turn of events with wide-eyed disbelief, finally found his voice. Actually, Alistair, he said, a surprising firmness entering his tone. I think Antonio might be onto something. Miss Miller has always been an exemplary employee, diligent, observant, and clearly, as we've seen, principled. Perhaps this is exactly the sort of fresh energy we need. He even managed a small, encouraging smile in Eliza's direction. It seemed Bellini's confidence had bolstered his own. Bellini clapped Henderson on the shoulder. Well said, Robert. You see, Alistair, even Robert recognizes the potential here. He turned back to Eliza. The role will be demanding, Miss Miller. You'll work closely with Julian, with the kitchen staff, with me. You'll be involved in training and quality control, in ensuring the guest experience is consistently excellent for everyone. The emphasis was not lost on Cromwell. And, Bellini added, his eyes twinkling, it will also involve tasting new dishes, perhaps even contributing some of your own ideas. I've heard whispers from Maria that your staff meal contributions are sometimes more creative than what's on the actual menu. Eliza flushed a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Maria, her loyal friend, had apparently been singing her praises in unexpected quarters. I do enjoy experimenting, sir. Excellent, Bellini beamed. Passion is the most vital ingredient in this business. Cromwell, who had been pacing the small office like a comed tiger, finally stopped. He let out a long, exasperated sigh, some of the fight seeming to drain out of him. He looked at Bellini, then at Eliza, then back at Bellini. "You always were a sentimental fool, Antonio." He grumbled, but the venom was noticeably diluted. There was almost a grudging respect in his tone. "Fine. It's your restaurant. Wreck it your own way." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "But if her standards slip, or if my steak isn't perfect next time, I'm still blaming you." Bellini chuckled. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Alistair. Now why don't you and Robert go and have a coffee in the restaurant? I'm sure the staff are eager to see their esteemed, if occasionally volcanic, patron hasn't scared away the owner. I need a few more minutes with Miss Miller to discuss the transition." Cromwell grunted, but he didn't argue further. He gave Eliza one last appraising look, no longer purely hostile, but filled with a grudging curiosity, then turned and walked out, Henderson scurrying after him, already looking less burdened. Once they were gone, Signor Bellini gestured for Eliza to remain seated. The atmosphere in the room immediately felt lighter, more relaxed. "Well, Miss Miller, or should I start calling you Eliza?" he said with a warm smile. "Eliza is fine, Signor Bellini," she replied, still feeling slightly dazed. "Please call me Antonio. We're going to be working closely together." He sat down in the chair Henderson had vacated, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Now about Alistair. He is complicated. Our fathers were business partners back in Italy a lifetime ago. Small import-export business. Marco, his uncle you heard me mention, was my father's dearest friend and the original chef at our family trattoria. Alistair inherited his father's business acumen, but not always his people skills. He's gruff, demanding, and pathologically convinced he's always the smartest man in the room." Antonio sighed. "But beneath that abrasive exterior, there's a history. He helped me financially when I first wanted to expand from the trattoria to something like the Crimson Sparrow. No fuss, no fanfare, just a quiet investment, a belief in my dream when others wavered. He's never asked for a penny back in profit from his share, always telling me to reinvest it. So his goodwill is more than just financial, it's personal. That's why his opinion, however badly delivered, matters to me." Eliza listened, fascinated. This was a side of Alistair Cromwell the world rarely saw a glimpse behind the curtain of the ruthless tycoon. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it added a layer of complexity. "His test last night," Antonio continued, "was actually quite telling. He pushes because he wants to see strength. He despises sycophants. By standing up to him respectfully but firmly, you did something most people are too intimidated to do. You earned a measure of his respect, even if he's too stubborn to admit it easily." "I honestly thought I was going to be fired on the spot," Eliza confessed. Antonio chuckled. "That would have been the easy way out for Henderson, perhaps. But not the right way. This restaurant. It's more than a business to me, Eliza. It's a legacy. My father, Chef Giovanni, taught me that food is love, and a restaurant is a home you open to strangers. Sometimes we get distracted by balance sheets and profit margins, and we forget the heart of it." He looked at her earnestly. "Your actions last night, Eliza, reminded me of that heart. That's why I made this decision. It wasn't impulsive. I see a spark in you. Not just culinary ambition, but a genuine understanding of what hospitality means. That's rare. And valuable." "I won't let you down, Antonio," Eliza said, her voice filled with a new determination. "I know you won't," he replied confidently. "Now the formalities. We'll need to sort out your new contract and salary with Henderson. It will be a significant increase. You'll start shadowing Julian tomorrow, learning the ropes of front-of-house management. But I also want you to spend time in the kitchen with Chef Dubois. Observe, learn, and don't be afraid to ask questions or even offer suggestions when appropriate. Chef Dubois is a traditionalist, but he's not entirely opposed to new ideas, especially if they're good." Eliza's mind buzzed with excitement. Time in a professional kitchen, learning from Chef Dubois, whose reputation was formidable. It was a dream come true. "There's one more thing," Antonio said, his expression growing a little more serious. "Alistair's investment, or rather his continued silent partnership, is still important. He was genuinely angry. While I believe he'll come around, part of your new role will involve ensuring that our more particular VVIPs, including Mr. Cromwell, are handled with exceptional skill and diplomacy. Think of it as your own special Cromwell management strategy." He winked. Eliza couldn't help but laugh. "I'll do my best, Antonio." "I'm sure you will." He stood up. "Welcome aboard, Eliza. Officially, I have a feeling you're going to do great things here at the Crimson Sparrow." As Eliza left Antonio's office, her feet barely touched the ground. The corridor that had seemed like a path to her execution now felt like a runway to a brighter future. She saw Julian by the maitre d' stand talking animatedly with Maria. When they saw her, their conversation stopped. Maria rushed towards her, her face a canvas of anxiety and hope. "Eliza, what happened? Are you okay?" "Did they—" Eliza couldn't contain her smile. "I'm more than okay, Maria." She took a deep breath. "They offered me the assistant manager position." Maria's jaw dropped. "What assistant manager? You're kidding me." Julian, too, looked stunned. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "No, I'm not kidding." Eliza beamed. "But Cromwell," Maria whispered, looking around as if he might materialize. "It's a long story," Eliza said. "A very long story. But let's just say Mr. Cromwell's outburst had some unexpected, positive consequences." Julian stepped forward, extending his hand. "Eliza, I'm astonished and thrilled. Congratulations. If anyone deserves it, you do. You were brilliant last night. Brave, but brilliant." "Thank you, Julian," Eliza said, shaking his hand warmly. "I'm looking forward to working with you even more closely." News, as it always does in the close-knit world of a restaurant, traveled fast. By lunchtime, most of the staff knew. There were looks of surprise, whispers, but mostly a genuine sense of pleasure for Eliza. She had always been well-liked, hard-working, fair, always willing to help a colleague. Her confrontation with Cromwell had become the stuff of instant legend, and her subsequent promotion was seen as a victory for them all, a sign that sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy or girl won. Later that day, as Eliza was going over some preliminary paperwork with a still slightly dazed but supportive Mr. Henderson Antonio Bellini, poked his head into the office. "Eliza, a moment." She followed him out into the main dining room, which was now being set for dinner service. He led her to table 7, Alistair Cromwell's table from the night before. "I had a rather spirited coffee with Alistair earlier," Antonio said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "He's still grumbling, of course, but he did say one thing that surprised me." "Oh?" Eliza asked, intrigued. He said, and I quote, "That waitress Miller. She's got guts. Too much for her own good, probably, but guts nonetheless. Don't let her get a swelled head, Antonio, but don't break her spirit either." Eliza was taken aback. It was the closest thing to a compliment she could ever imagine receiving from Alistair Cromwell. Antonio smiled. He also made a reservation for next Tuesday. Same table. Specifically requested you oversee his service as the new assistant manager. He said he wants to see if you can handle the pressure. Eliza felt a flicker of the old nervousness, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of resolve. I can handle it, Antonio. I know, he said. But this time, Eliza, if he gets too loud. Antonio winked. Send the bill to me. He then looked around the grand dining room, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know I was serious about that Le Cordon Bleu dream of yours. This new role comes with new opportunities. We have a professional development fund. It's modest, but for the right candidate showing exceptional promise and dedication, we've been known to sponsor further culinary training. Eliza's eyes widened. The possibility, once a distant, shimmering mirage, suddenly felt tangible within reach. Prove yourself here, Eliza. Antonio said, his voice earnest. Show me that passion, that dedication. Show me you can help the Crimson Sparrow not just survive, but thrive to become even better. And who knows what doors might open next. For the first time in a long time, Eliza felt the future stretching out before her, not as a path fraught with anxiety and uncertainty, but as an open road full of promise and exhilarating possibilities. It all started with a simple request to lower a voice, a moment of courage she didn't know she possessed. And now a new chapter was beginning at the Crimson Sparrow. The weeks following her promotion were a whirlwind for Eliza as she embraced her new role as assistant manager. She shadowed Julian, mastering the complexities of front-of-house operations, and earned the grudging respect of the stern Chef Dubois, with her humility and genuine interest in the kitchen. Antonio Bellini became her mentor, valuing her fresh perspective and inspiring her with his passion. Her Cromwell management strategy was tested when Alistair Cromwell returned the next Tuesday. Eliza handled him with calm professionalism, earning a surprisingly positive, if gruff, assessment of his meal. This success, along with the small positive changes she implemented, fostered a renewed sense of pride among the staff. She even began contributing to menu ideas, with one of her grandmother's recipes becoming a successful special. The significant pay increase also allowed her to provide better medical care for her mother, whose health improved. Months later, Antonio informed Eliza that Cromwell, impressed by her integrity and performance, had proposed a major investment in the Crimson Sparrow. He said Eliza had reminded him of the restaurant's true soul. The investment came with one condition. A portion was to create a Staff Excellence Fund. Its first act was to be a full scholarship for Eliza to attend Le Cordon Bleu in Paris after her first year as assistant manager. Cromwell felt someone who could handle his temper with such grace deserved to learn from the best. Overcome with joy, Eliza saw her once distant dream become a promised reality, a future full of possibility taking flight. And so Eliza's journey took a turn she never imagined. From a nerve-wracking confrontation to an incredible opportunity, her courage didn't just save her job. It transformed her life and began to reshape the very restaurant she worked for. Alistair Cromwell, the difficult rich man, became an unlikely catalyst for change. Reminded of deeper values by a waitress who simply dared to speak up, Eliza's story shows us that integrity and bravery can bloom in the most unexpected places, and sometimes standing your ground can lead to your dreams taking flight. If Eliza's story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of courage and the possibility of positive change, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that tug at the heartstrings and celebrate the human spirit. What would you have done in Eliza's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.